So let's go back and look at the 7 possible ways that evidence vanishes. Okay. And you're going to like numbers 3 and 5 when I explain what they mean and what a lawyer would do with them. Okay. So let me just say, here's the desired timeline. And you guys, when you look at these types of evidence that I'm about to go into, I want you to be thinking about this. The job of each party is to narrow the focus, this whole long timeline of events from the day that the accused.
The defense worries about from the event and then the past and prior. The prosecution is worried about from the event and forward. That's how that works. It all starts from the event. The prosecution are working from the event forward. The defense is working from the event and past history, going into the history of the Austin brothers. Who are they? Were they good kids? All of those things, that's up to the defense. The prosecution's only trying to prove everything from the event forward would happen. And that's what we're looking at in this diagram.
And the victim were born up until, right, this whole long period of time. Each party wants to narrow the timeline to those issues, to those incidents which most support their case. Okay. So if you look at if you look at the slide that I have up, okay, so the top line, the blue line is what the prosecutor wants. Okay. The yellow line is what the defense wants. Okay. And that big that big bam in the middle, that's the incident, right? That was the moment that Karmelo did whatever he did, or whoever did whatever they did. That's that moment. Okay. So the prosecutor wants you to focus on everything that happened after that. And they want to limit your focus on what led up to that moment. But instead, right, instead of looking at what happened under the tent, how they got to the tent, how they were, the weeks before and the days before, and what their reputations were and what their school habits were, the prosecution, which is that top blue line, they're like, none of that matters. What matters is the moment that Karmelo decided to do what he did and after, right? So when they show him running, right, they spent more time showing him running away from the incident than they did in the incident, right? And the reason that they would do that, and again, I don't know why they do that, but I can tell you why a prosecutor would do that, is because they're trying to show that whatever happened after the event means something. You can read into it guilt or innocence, or you can interpret his words, or he ran so fast, therefore this or that, right? That's everything after is what that means. That's what the prosecutor wants you to focus on. The defendant, on the other hand, wants you to focus on everything that led up to their client doing what they did, right? The defense is like, wait a minute, this didn't happen in a vacuum. A bunch of stuff led up to this moment. And so what the defense wants you to do is they want you to focus on everything that led up to the event. And so when it comes to the kind of evidence that they're looking at and using, right, the defense is going to want to bring in evidence that shows the past. What led up to this moment that made my client do this? It didn't happen in a vacuum, right? The prosecution in this case is going to say, it doesn't matter what happened before. It doesn't matter if they had a previous relationship. It doesn't matter what their respective, reputations were. All that matters is the moment that this guy decided to delete our, this poor victim, right? So, and I put on there, and sometimes the reverse, right? Because sometimes it's the opposite, right? The prosecution wants to show you everything before the incident, right? And the defense is like, that doesn't matter. Let's focus on, what happened and then what happened after that, right? So let me give you an example of that. The prosecution is trying a guy for sending some woman packing. The prosecution is going to say things like, for 6 months, he stalked her, right? For, 3 months before the incident, he was doing Google searches for. The defense is going to say, well, maybe, but that doesn't mean that on this day that he's the one who sent her packing, right? So they try to narrow people's attention to the time frame that they want. And sometimes sometimes there's significance to that, right? Sometimes what happens before or after is significant. So if one of the two parties is successful in getting that part out, then they win. And let me show you how they do it. Okay, and you guys go ahead and subscribe, like, comment, subscribe so that you can leave a comment, because I am going to get to these comments. Like, subscribe, share it out on your timeline, and also send a super chat. I appreciate the support that you guys have given to the channel, right? I'm having a lot of fun doing this. Okay, so as we look at this evidence, I want you to be thinking, which party has the most interest in getting it out, right? So for example, if there was a history, right, a lot of Karmelo supporters say yes to the afterlife. A lot of Karmelo supporters say that, you know, this kid had been a bully. He had a history of being a bully. He was a known bully, right? So the defense would be interested in bringing in this evidence, and they would have reasons for it. The prosecution is like, it doesn't matter if he was a bully on this day, right? Okay, so I want you to be thinking that as we go through the rules, okay? So here are the 7 places where evidence moves along the channel, okay? So the first sort of phase of evidence is all the evidence in the world. Everything that exists that could or could not bear on this case. And then you split that in half, and you have everything in the world that could bear on this case. And then you have all the other stuff that's totally irrelevant. Okay? So some portion of that big universe of evidence, some portion of that is going to be received, collected, and processed by the police. So I'm going to walk you through these 7, and then I'm going to show you how evidence gets eliminated, right? How this circle gets smaller and smaller and smaller. Okay, so the first.
Okay, so let's just break that down a little bit. Stage 1, all the evidence in the world. Did the police ever find anything? Was witnesses staying silent? Did the cameras don't capture every angle? Or some evidence that simply never exists? So just because we don't know something doesn't automatically mean that someone hid it, but sometimes the evidence is never collected in the first place. That's a very big possibility. But these are Brady materials. The prosecution has the constitutional bearing, the right to have to bring this forward, but also the defense are supposed to ask for certain things to make sure that everything is brought into the court, all right? So let's get back to that. Salute to everybody. Make sure you're dropping a like, sharing, and hitting the polls for me, all right? I appreciate that.
Like I said, is all the possible evidence in the world. Some of it pertains to this matter. Some of it does not. So the next phase, which is a narrower phase, that is that portion of evidence which is received by the police, either because someone brought it to the attention of the police, it was collected at the scene and processed by the police, right? You see that as a much smaller set of information, okay? The next thing is the prosecution's entire file, okay? And that is documents, witness testimony, evidence, blood results, blood samples, right? Everything that they've got, video footage, cell phone footage, it's everything that they've got. The next place where that shrinks is what percentage of what the prosecution has do they disclose to the defense? And a lot of people feel like they did not disclose enough to the defense. And I'm going to show you where you might be right, but then I'm going to show you where even if they had disclosed it, that still doesn't mean that it would get to the jury. And even if it did get to the jury, that still doesn't mean it would get to us, the public. Okay? So now the prosecution has disclosed some subset of everything it has to the defense. And I'm going to tell you what it would and would not disclose to the defense. So the next place where it gets a little bit smaller is what percentage of that information that has been shared between the parties gets offered by either side at trial, right? So the prosecution has this big, robust file. they're going to disclose some subset of what they have to the defense. And then the body of evidence gets even smaller because the defense and the prosecutor, they still may or may not offer it at trial. Just because the prosecutor has it doesn't mean they have to use it at trial. Just because the defense has it doesn't mean they have to use it at trial. Okay, so now we've got a much smaller body of evidence of what is offered at trial. And just because it's offered, right, you see this circle keeps getting smaller and smaller. And I'm going to show you why in a minute if you just got here. Just because they offer it at trial does not mean that the jury is going to see it, right? Because what happens there is that the judge can say that this is not going to the jury, right? This is not helpful or useful to the jury, or it will not help them get to more of a right answer. Okay. And then the last thing, even what the jury sees, that.
Thank you, Paula, for the super chat. Thank you. I just think that this is something that we all need to know. Everybody's not legally savvy, but this kinds of breakdowns, what happens to evidence, because we know he's speculating. I think that he got a lackluster defense. Some people saying that they think the defense was in on the whole fix. So when we start to see what happens with evidence and the whole process, now we can start to make better engaging arguments when we're talking online, when we're talking amongst each other, talking amongst our peers, we can make better arguments. So that's why I brought this video specifically from a lawyer for her to break it down for us so that we can all listen to it, you know? Salute to y'all.
Doesn't mean that the public will see that. There still can be another cut before the.
If you're in the other channel, hop on over to Uda On Go on YouTube, OOTAONGO on YouTube right now. We're live over here. I'm going to end it on my other channel. We're going to be live on Uda On Go. Just hop on over, all right, y'all? Salute to everybody. Make sure y'all liking. Make sure y'all subscribing. Make sure you're hitting that poll, though, because I will be changing the poll in a second, just gauging where your thoughts are at with a few questions, all right? So I just want everybody involved and very interactive in this case. This is a very polarizing case. A lot of us are very emotionally attached to this case. So we just want to get down to what the facts are. Again, I'm still waiting for the transcripts. I spoke to the court reporter, but we're waiting for the appellate court's procedure. And after that, then they would be available, and it will be available for all of us to purchase. And I will be getting them, and I will be letting y'all know as soon as they hit me back to let me know when that process is over. So we're waiting for the appeals court. Salute to Earth, honey. Salute.
Public sees it, and there are various reasons for that. Some of it could be to protect some of the parties. Some of it could be because it pertains to another ongoing matter, right? Okay, so let me go back and walk you through each of these phases and show you how these different baskets, they're really more like a sieve, right? Every time you dump a glut of evidence into one of these 7 places, a little bit seeps out the bottom, right? It's more like a sieve than it is like a bowl. Okay. All right. Okay. So you guys, again, tell me what you think. Tell me what evidence you think is still out there. Tell me who you think hit it or whatever you think happened to it. And let's see at the end, let's see if people are right. I'm going to go through the comments later. Okay. So tell me what you think in the chat, and I'll get back to those in a minute. Okay. So, and you guys, I'm sorry that some of this is small. I hope you guys are watching this on your laptops. Okay. So we started the first phase of evidence, right? Is this big universe of all the possible evidence in the world. Some 99.9999% of it has nothing to do with this particular case, but there is this body of evidence that exists in the world related to this case. How does that go away? The first way that body of evidence that pertains to this case already gets smaller is because it's never found. The police never find it, right? They never find the murder weapon.
Thank you, No More Drama, for your contribution to the channel, and shows me that you appreciate in this live as well. I will be doing more lives for y'all, but I most definitely appreciate that love. So salute to you, Queen. Appreciate that.
Then they never find any fingerprints. They never find a particular witness who may know something, right? Some of this evidence will just never be found, right? The second thing is that it's unknown. Nobody even knows that it exists to go looking for it. So if you don't know that it exists, you can't send somebody out to find it and bring it back. Another way is there's no snitching culture, right? No snitching culture, or people who just don't want to get involved. They don't want it to come back on them, so they say nothing, right? You hear those cases where people came back and they said, 30 years later, yeah, I was there, I saw everything, I was afraid to say anything, right? And they hold these secrets, right? Yeah, it was my girlfriend, it was my boyfriend, he told me if I told that my whole family would be in trouble, etc., right? So, there's this idea that people don't snitch. There's this idea that people don't come forward for their own reasons. And sometimes people are the critical witness and they literally don't tell a single soul for like 30 years, right? So this is how the evidence that exists in the world can just not make it into the process. Like it just never, ever materializes. Okay, so here's the second thing, right? So when we talk about evidence that is actually received and collected and processed, we still lose some of that evidence.
So this is the second section that we're going through, the evidence that's collected by the police. Now, this is where mistakes can happen. Evidence can be misplaced, mislabeled, or never logged correctly. That's different from someone intentionally hiding some evidence, but a lot of people may think that evidence was hidden in Karmelo Anthony's case. I've seen and heard a lot of the speculations, but we have to stress the distinction between negligent and misconduct. Were they being negligent or was it misconduct? I'm going to leave that up to y'all to decide what you think about that.
Before we get to court, okay? The evidence can be lost, right? You guys, I'm sure, have heard of evidentiary files getting lost, whole boxes getting lost, right? Stuff just gets lost. Sometimes it gets intentionally misplaced. Now, some people may be thinking in both of these cases, in number one